Most people assume they behave most naturally when they are alone or unobserved. Psychological data shows the opposite can be true. Absence of observation does not reveal authenticity. It reveals regulation failure or internal self-monitoring systems taking over. What you call natural behavior is often just behavior without external correction. In controlled behavioral studies conducted throughout the late 20th century, psychologists repeatedly introduced a simple variable: observation versus non-observation. Participants were placed in identical tasks: problem solving, social interaction, even moral decision making. In one condition, they were explicitly told they were being observed. In the other, observation was removed or made uncertain. The results were not subtle. Behavior did not simply change in magnitude, it changed in structure. Response patterns became more consistent under observation, more variable when the observer was absent. Posture stabilized when surveillance was implied. Decision-making became more socially aligned when evaluation was expected. But when observation disappeared, a different behavioral signature emerged, one that researchers found more informative than the controlled condition itself. The question that followed was not about what people do when watched. It was about what remains when they believe no one is watching. This analysis is based on a core principle in behavioral psychology known as unobserved baseline behavior. It refers to the set of actions individuals produce when social evaluation pressure is reduced or removed. In other words, behavior that is least filtered by impression management. The concept connects directly to foundational work in social psychology, including Robert Cialdini's research on social proof and normative influence, as well as experimental paradigms similar to those used in Milgram-style authority studies, where perceived evaluation significantly alters decision architecture. What emerges across these domains is a consistent pattern. Human behavior is not stable across contexts. It is conditional on perceived observation. By the end of this analysis, the viewer will be able to distinguish between performed behavior and baseline behavior and recognize how subtle environmental cues shift people between the two states, not by what they say, but by how their behavior reorganizes when the audience disappears. In observed conditions, individuals unconsciously align behavior with perceived expectations. This includes posture regulation, speech moderation, and reduced variability in decision-making. What appears as composure is often a regulated behavioral output designed to minimize deviation from social norms. When observation is removed, that stabilization weakens. Behavior becomes less uniform, more exploratory, and often more internally driven. What we call normal behavior is often just behavior under mild surveillance pressure. The brain continuously models external judgment, even in low-stakes environments. This creates a baseline of self-correction that is rarely recognized as artificial. Detection tool. Observe consistency across environments. Individuals who show extreme behavioral stability only in group contexts often display strong social calibration rather than intrinsic consistency. This establishes the first layer. Behavior is not fixed, it is regulated. When observation is removed, small irregularities begin to surface. Speech becomes less structured, gestures become less symmetrical. Timing between actions becomes less controlled. These are not errors in personality, they are releases of cognitive regulation. The brain reduces self-monitoring load when evaluation pressure is absent, allowing lower-level behavioral tendencies to emerge. Perfection in behavior is not natural. It is sustained effort. Detection tool. Compare individuals in group settings versus isolated or informal settings. Look for differences in pacing, stillness, and conversational control. The greater the divergence, the stronger the influence of external evaluation on behavior formation. This layer introduces a key idea. Observation does not reveal truth, it suppresses variability. Psychological research into self-awareness, including work on objective self-awareness theory, shows that individuals constantly toggle between internal and external monitoring systems. When external monitoring is implied, behavior aligns with expected norms. When it is absent, internal monitoring becomes dominant but less structured. This transition is not smooth. It has a threshold effect. Below a certain level of perceived observation, behavioral regulation drops sharply rather than gradually. Human behavior is not gradually authentic, it is contextually unlocked. Detection tool. Notice sudden shifts in expressiveness when people believe they are no longer being evaluated. The change is often more abrupt than anticipated. This sets up the deeper question: what is being regulated, behavior itself, or identity expression? Modern environments complicate this framework. The presence of cameras, recordings, and digital traces creates a persistent sense of observation, even in private settings. As a result, baseline behavior is increasingly rare. Most behavior is partially performed for potential future observation. Studies in digital self-presentation show that individuals adjust behavior even when no immediate audience is present due to anticipated visibility. The mind does not require a present observer. It only requires the possibility of one. Detection tool. Observe individuals in truly low-record environments versus digitally aware environments. The difference is often not in action, but in behavioral restraint. This layer reveals an uncomfortable shift. Observation is no longer external. It is internalized. But here is where it becomes more complex. Not all changes in unobserved behavior reflect authenticity. Some individuals experience increased self-control when alone, not less. Others become more performative in private than in public. This contradicts the assumption that unobserved equals authentic. In reality, unobserved conditions simply remove one regulatory system, but can activate another. For some, internal standards replace social standards with even greater intensity. So the absence of observation does not reveal truth, it reveals the dominant source of regulation. Behavioral psychology identifies two broad regulatory orientations: external and internal. Externally regulated individuals depend heavily on social feedback loops. Internally regulated individuals rely on self-imposed standards, often independent of external context. When observation is removed, externally regulated behavior becomes more fluid. Internally regulated behavior often becomes more rigid. This creates the illusion of inconsistency in human behavior, when in reality it reflects different control architectures. People are not inconsistent, they are differently calibrated. Detection tool. Observe whether behavioral stability increases or decreases in private contexts. This distinction reveals the primary regulatory system of the individual. When removed from all evaluative contexts, individuals eventually settle into what researchers call behavioral baseline states. These are not emotional truths, they are operational defaults. Some become quieter, others more expressive, some more controlled, some more chaotic. None of these are moral indicators, they are system outputs. What matters is consistency of pattern across repeated low observation conditions. Baseline behavior is not personality. It is reduced inhibition under minimal external constraint. This final layer completes the structural model. Behavior is not revealed under observation. It is reorganized by it. If behavior changes predictably based on observation, then no single version of a person is fully representative. Each individual exists as multiple behavioral states, activated by context, pressure, and perceived evaluation. The implication is not deception, it is fragmentation. Human behavior is not a stable expression of identity. It is a negotiation between internal drives and external perception systems. So the unsettling question is not whether people are real when unobserved. It is whether real is a coherent category at all when behavior is structurally dependent on context. And if that is true, then every interaction you observe, including your own, is only one configuration of a much larger system. Now that the mechanism is understood, interpretation shifts from judgment to pattern mapping. 3 operational tools follow. Do not evaluate behavior in isolation. Compare across contexts. Stability across environments indicates internal regulation. Variability indicates external dependency. Identify transitions, not states. The most informative data is not how someone behaves, but how quickly they shift when observation changes. Distinguish authenticity from consistency. Authenticity is not a single state, it is the repeatability of behavioral patterns under reduced evaluation pressure. What most people interpret as personality is often just behavioral adaptation to invisible audiences, and once that is understood, observation itself changes meaning, because you are no longer watching what people are. You are watching what they become when the system of observation shifts around them. The next layer of this research moves further inward, into how people begin to simulate observation even when none exists, and what that reveals about internalized authority structures.